The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet highway. A rusty old pickup truck rattled down the road, its engine sputtering as it struggled to maintain speed. Inside, the driver, a middle-aged man with rough hands and tired eyes, gripped the wheel tightly. He wasn't speeding, but the truck's loud exhaust and wobbly movement made it stand out. A police cruiser sat parked near an exit ramp, its officer watching the flow of traffic. When the rusty truck rolled by, the officer's trained eye caught a few things: the cracked taillight, the way the truck swayed slightly, and the faded license plate that was hard to read. He flicked on his lights and pulled out behind the truck. The driver's heart sank as he saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He let out a slow breath and eased the truck onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires. He knew this old truck wasn't in perfect shape, but he needed it for work. Now, a ticket he couldn't afford might be coming his way. The officer stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his hat as he approached. He was calm but alert, one hand resting near his belt just in case. The driver rolled down his window, the crank squeaking as he turned it. "Evening, sir," the officer said. "You know why I pulled you over?" The driver hesitated. My taillight? It's been cracked for a while. I've been meaning to fix it, but..." The officer nodded. "That's one thing. Your plate's also pretty faded. Hard to read from a distance." He glanced inside the truck, noting the worn seats and the small stack of papers on the passenger side. "License and registration, please." The driver reached for his wallet, fingers slightly unsteady. He handed over his license and then leaned over to dig through the glove compartment for the registration. The officer took the documents and stepped back to his cruiser to run the details. A few minutes passed. The driver drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, watching the officer in the mirror. Then, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV with government plates rolled up behind the police cruiser. The officer, still in his car, noticed it immediately. His posture straightened. The SUV's door opened, and out stepped a man in a crisp military uniform, his rank insignia marking him as someone high up. The officer quickly stepped out of his cruiser, his demeanor shifting from routine stop to full attention. The military officer approached, his expression unreadable. "Everything all right here?" the military officer asked, his voice calm but carrying authority. The patrol officer hesitated. "Just a routine traffic stop, sir. Broken taillight and obscured license plate." The military man glanced at the rusty truck, then back at the officer. "Mind if I take a look?" Something in his tone made the officer step aside. The military officer walked up to the truck's window. The driver, now even more nervous, had no idea what was happening. The military man studied him for a moment, then did something completely unexpected. He smiled. "Long time no see," he said. The driver blinked, confused. Then, slowly, recognition dawned on his face. His eyes widened. The driver stared at the military officer, his mouth slightly open. His mind raced. Where did he know this man from? The uniform, the confident stance, the sharp eyes, then it hit him. Boot camp. 20 years ago. A different life. The driver's rough hands tightened on the steering wheel as memories flashed in his mind: drills at dawn, exhaustion so deep it felt like death, and the one guy in his unit who never quit, no matter how hard things got. That guy was now standing at his window, wearing the rank of a high-ranking officer. The military officer's smile softened. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" The driver swallowed hard. Yeah, I do. It's just," he shook his head, almost laughing in disbelief. "You're the last person I expected to see." Behind them, the police officer shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what was happening. He cleared his throat. Sir? You know this man?" The military officer turned slightly. "We served together." A long time ago. He looked back at the driver. Mind if we talk for a minute? The driver hesitated, then nodded. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the truck, his boots crunching on the gravel. Up close, the differences between the two men were even clearer, one in a worn flannel and dusty jeans, the other in a perfectly pressed uniform. The military officer extended his hand. "It's good to see you." The driver shook it, feeling the strength in the grip. "You too, sir." He added the last word awkwardly, unsure of the right way to address him now. The officer chuckled. "None of that. Not with you." He glanced at the police officer, who was still watching them with curiosity. "You mind giving us a moment?" The patrolman hesitated but then nodded. "I'll, wait in my car." He walked back to his cruiser, glancing over his shoulder once before sliding into the driver's seat. Once they were alone, the military officer crossed his arms, studying the rusty truck. "Still driving this old thing, huh?" The driver let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, well. She gets me where I need to go." A pause. The weight of years hung between them, decades of different paths, different struggles. The military officer's expression turned serious. "I heard about what happened. After you got out." The driver stiffened. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Yeah. Well. Things didn't exactly go as planned." The officer didn't press. He just nodded, like he understood more than he was saying. Then, after a beat, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "Here." The driver took it, frowning. It was a contact card, name, rank, phone number. "If you ever need anything," the officer said, his voice low. "A job. Help. Anything. Call me." The driver stared at the card, emotions churning in his chest. Pride warred with gratitude, shame with relief. Before he could respond, a radio crackled from the SUV. A voice called out, "Sir? We're on a tight schedule." The military officer sighed. "Duty calls." He clapped the driver on the shoulder. "Don't be a stranger." Then, just like that, he turned and walked back to the SUV. The driver stood there, watching as the black vehicle pulled away, leaving him alone with the police officer, the old truck, and a card that felt heavy in his hand. The patrolman stepped out of his cruiser again, looking between the driver and the disappearing SUV. After a long moment, he handed back the license and registration. "You're free to go," he said. "Just, get that taillight fixed, all right?" The driver nodded, tucking the card carefully into his wallet. "Yeah. I will." As he climbed back into the truck and started the engine, his mind was no longer on the cracked taillight or the faded license plate. It was on the past, and the unexpected lifeline that had just been thrown his way. The rusty truck rumbled back onto the highway, its engine groaning under the strain. The driver kept one hand on the wheel, the other absently touching his wallet where the officer's card was tucked away. His mind was far from the road, lost in memories he'd tried to bury long ago. Years earlier, in a dusty overseas base, the sun burned white-hot in the sky. The driver, younger, stronger, but with the same tired eyes, stood at attention alongside his unit. Boots pounded the ground as drills screamed orders. Among them was the man who would one day become that high-ranking officer. Back then, he was just another soldier, determined, sharp, but no different from the rest on the surface. They weren't friends, not really. But war has a way of bonding people in ways civilian life never could. They shared rations, long patrols, and the kind of silence that only comes when everyone is too exhausted to speak. Then, one night, everything changed. An ambush. Gunfire in the dark. The driver remembered dragging a wounded comrade to cover, remembered the deafening explosions, remembered looking up to see the future officer barking orders, holding the line when everything was chaos. They made it out, most of them, anyway. But something inside the driver had cracked that night. A horn blared, snapping him back to the present. He swerved slightly, heart pounding, as a car sped past him. He tightened his grip on the wheel and let out a slow breath. Get it together. But the memories kept coming. After that deployment, things had unraveled fast. The military gave him an honorable discharge, medical reasons, they said. But it wasn't his body that had failed him. Nights were the worst. The dreams. The noise. The way his hands shook when a car backfired. Civilian life didn't know what to do with men like him. Jobs didn't last. Relationships crumbled. Eventually, he stopped telling people he'd served at all. And now? Now he was just a guy in a beat-up truck, trying to scrape together enough for rent and gas. The truck's engine sputtered, jerking him out of his thoughts again. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty. He sighed and pulled into the next gas station, rolling to a stop beside the pumps. As he stepped out, his boots scuffed against cracked pavement. The station was quiet, just an old attendant behind the counter and a couple of truckers drinking coffee at a small table inside. He grabbed the nozzle and started filling the tank, his eyes drifting to his reflection in the truck's dirty window. When did I start looking this old? A voice cut through his thoughts. Hey! He turned. One of the truckers, a burly guy with a thick beard, was standing nearby, squinting at him. You alright, man? You've been staring at that pump like it's gonna talk back. The driver blinked. Yeah. Just tired. The trucker nodded like he understood. Long haul? Something like that. The man studied him for a second, then jerked his thumb toward the station. Coffee's cheap and strong. Helps. The driver almost smiled. Might take you up on that. He finished filling the tank, paid inside, and grabbed a cup of coffee. The warmth seeped into his hands as he leaned against his truck, watching the highway. His fingers brushed his wallet again. Call me. Did he even have the right to? After all these years? After walking away? He pulled out the card, turning it over in his hands. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he took out his phone and dialed. It rang once. Twice. Then. Didn't think you'd call this fast. The voice on the other end was familiar, amused. The driver let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Yeah, well, he said, staring at the ground. Figured I'd save you the suspense. A chuckle. Where are you? Gas station off Route 27. Stay there. The line went dead. The driver stared at his phone. What the hell just happened? He barely had time to finish his coffee before a black SUV, the same one from earlier, pulled into the station. The military officer stepped out, still in uniform, and walked straight toward him. No smile this time. Just a quiet intensity. We need to talk, he said. The driver set his coffee cup down slowly, his pulse kicking up a notch. The officer's tone left no room for debate. This wasn't just a friendly chat. Without a word, he followed the officer to the SUV. The tinted windows hid the interior from view, adding to the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. The officer opened the back door and gestured for him to get in. Inside, the air was cool, the seats smooth leather. A divider separated them from the front, giving the space the feel of a private office. The officer sat across from him, studying him with that same unreadable expression. You left in a hurry back then, the officer said finally. The driver rubbed his palms on his jeans. Didn't exactly have a choice. A beat of silence. Then the officer reached into a compartment and pulled out a file. He slid it across the seat. Take a look. The driver hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were photos, old military records, newspaper clippings, even a few surveillance-style shots of him in recent years. His throat tightened. What is this? After I saw you today, I pulled your file. Wanted to see how you'd been. The officer leaned forward. You fell off the radar hard after discharge. No VA visits. No job history. Just, gone. The driver shut the folder, pushing it back. Yeah, well. Some of us don't get the hero's welcome. The officer didn't flinch. I know about the PTSD. The night terrors. The jobs you lost because you couldn't handle crowds. His voice dropped. I also know you turned down every outreach program the Army offered. Heat rose in the driver's chest. Those programs are for guys who still believe in the system. I did my time. I'm done. Are you? The officer held his gaze. Because the man I served with didn't quit. Not even when. Don't. The driver's hands curled into fists. That guy's dead. You're talking to the ghost. For the first time, something flickered in the officer's eyes, not pity, but recognition. Funny, he said quietly. I used to say the same thing. The driver frowned. The officer rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a jagged scar running from elbow to wrist. Took 6 months of rehab to hold a pen again. A year before I stopped waking up screaming. He met the driver's stare. They wanted to discharge me too. The driver exhaled sharply. He'd never known, back in their unit, the officer had been the unshakable one. The Rock. The sleeve went back down. I'm not here to drag up the past. I'm here because we're starting a new program, helping guys like us transition to civilian work that actually means something. He tapped the file. You've got skills most civilians will never understand. We could use you. The driver stared out the window at his rusted truck. Doing what? Private security for high-risk humanitarian convoys. Good pay. Structured teams. No bureaucracy, just the work, with people who get it. The officer paused. And therapy that doesn't feel like therapy. A trucker walked by outside, laughing into his phone. The normalcy of it felt surreal compared to the conversation happening in this soundproof bubble. The driver shook his head. I'm not some charity case. Damn right you're not. The officer's voice hardened. This isn't pity. It's an assignment. These convoys need someone who won't freeze when shots ring out. That's you. He leaned back. But I won't beg. The SUV's clock ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, the driver reached for the door handle. I'll think about it. The officer nodded, pulling out a pen and writing on a fresh card. 48 hours. Then the slot's gone. He handed it over. Your old bunk's empty. Would be good to fill it. The driver stepped out into the afternoon sun, the card burning a hole in his pocket. Behind him, the SUV's window rolled down. Oh, and get that taillight fixed, the officer called. Can't have you getting pulled over on the way to base. The driver stood in the parking lot long after the black SUV disappeared down the highway. The officer's words echoed in his head, 48 hours. Then the slot's gone. He climbed back into his truck, the familiar scent of oil and old vinyl wrapping around him. For a moment, he just sat there, gripping the wheel. Then he started the engine and pulled onto the road, driving aimlessly. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Normally, he'd be heading home, a tiny rented room above a garage, but tonight, he couldn't face those four walls. Instead, he found himself at a roadside diner he sometimes stopped at when the nights got too quiet. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and a waitress wiping down tables. He slid into a booth by the window and ordered coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Marge, gave him a once-over as she poured his cup. Rough day? He shrugged. Just thinking. She nodded like she understood and left him alone. The coffee was bitter, just how he liked it. He pulled the officer's card from his pocket and laid it on the table, staring at the neat handwriting, a phone number, an address, and a time, 0700. Don't be late. What am I even considering? He hadn't set foot on a military base in years. Hadn't worn a uniform, hadn't followed orders. The thought of going back, even in a civilian capacity, made his chest tighten. But then he thought about his life now, the dead-end jobs, the way his hands still shook sometimes when a car backfired, the nights he woke up drenched in sweat, convinced he was back there. The bell above the diner door jingled. He glanced up as a group of construction workers filed in, laughing and shoving each other. One of them, a big guy with a beard, noticed him sitting alone and gave a friendly nod. The driver returned it stiffly. Normal people. Living normal lives. He wondered if he'd ever really be one of them. Marge came back to refill his coffee. You gonna order something, hon, or just drink yourself awake all night? He almost smiled. Guess I should eat. She scribbled down his order, burger, fries, no pickles, and walked off. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his landlord, rent's due Friday. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Money was always tight. The officer had mentioned good pay. The food arrived, but he barely tasted it. His mind kept circling back to the same question, could he really do this? Later, back in his rented room, he lay on the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The card was still in his hand. He thought about the officer's scar, the quiet understanding in his eyes. I used to say the same thing. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about going back. Maybe it was about moving forward. He picked up his phone before he could second-guess himself and sent a single text, I'll be there. The reply came instantly, knew you would. The gates loomed ahead, tall, iron, flanked by armed guards. The driver's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he rolled his truck to a stop at the checkpoint. One of the guards approached, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. Name and purpose? The driver cleared his throat. Here to report to Colonel Hayes. Security detail. The guard scanned a clipboard, then nodded. ID. He handed over his civilian driver's license, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place his rusted truck looked on a military base. The guard squinted at the license, then back at him. You're the new recruit. Recruit. The word stuck in his ribs. Just here for a job. A pause. Then the guard jerked his thumb toward a parking lot. Leave the vehicle there. Someone'll meet you. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of diesel and cut grass. He stood awkwardly beside his truck, watching uniformed personnel stride past with purpose. No one glanced his way. A golf cart hummed up, driven by a young corporal with a buzz cut. You Hayes guy? He nodded. Hop in. The cart zipped through the base, passing barracks, a mess hall, a training field where a unit jogged in formation. The familiarity of it all was a punch to the gut, the shouted orders, the rhythmic thud of boots on dirt. His palms grew damp. The corporal pulled up outside a nondescript building. Colonel's inside. Good luck. The office was sparse, a desk, a few chairs, a coffee pot bubbling in the corner. The officer, Colonel Hayes, he reminded himself, looked up from a stack of papers. You came. The driver shrugged. Said I would. Hayes stood, rounding the desk. He wore fatigues now instead of dress uniform, but the authority in his stance was the same. First things first. You're not enlisting. This is contract work, civilian pay, civilian rules. But you follow the chain of command like everyone else. I can handle structure. Hayes studied him. I know. That's why you're here. He grabbed a folder. You'll train for 2 weeks. Weapons recertification, convoy protocols, emergency medical. After that, you ship out. Where? Not your concern yet. Hayes handed him the folder. Barracks are down the hall. Shower, shave, be back here at 1300 for briefing. The driver hesitated. What if I wash out? Hayes almost smiled. You won't. The barracks were empty, bunks neatly made. He claimed a cot by the window, setting his duffel bag down with a thud. The mattress was thin, the pillow flat. Just like old times. He peeled off his civilian clothes, worn jeans, faded flannel, and stood under the shower's weak spray, scrubbing away road dust and doubt. The water ran brown at his feet. Back in the main room, he found a set of fatigues folded on his bunk. No rank, no insignia. Just plain tan fabric. He dressed slowly, the material stiff against his skin. The mirror above the sink showed a stranger, clean-shaven, hair damp, clad in military-issue garb. He touched his reflection, half expecting it to shatter. A clock on the wall ticked toward 1300. The briefing room held a dozen others, men and women in similar fatigues, some young, some grizzled. Conversations died as Hayes entered. Listen up. You're here because you've got skills civilians can't teach. Hayes tapped a map on the wall. Next month, we escort medical supplies into a conflict zone. Ambush risk is high. Your job is to get the cargo through. A woman with a scar across her eyebrow raised her hand. Rules of engagement? Return fire only. No heroes. Hayes' gaze swept the room. You follow orders, you come home. You don't, people die. Understood? Nods all around. The driver's pulse thrummed. He'd done this before, different war, same stakes. Hayes dismissed them, but caught his arm on the way out. Walk with me. They stepped into the golden afternoon. How's it feel? Hayes asked. Like I never left. Hayes nodded toward the training field, where recruits struggled through an obstacle course. That's the problem. You did leave. But the war didn't leave you. He stopped, turning to face him. This isn't about going back to battle. It's about making that sacrifice mean something. A shout rang out from the field, a drill sergeant correcting form. The wind carried the scent of gun oil. The driver flexed his hands, feeling the old calluses. When do we start? Hayes clapped his shoulder. Now. The rifle range smelled of gunpowder and sweat. The driver, no, he wasn't just a driver anymore, he reminded himself, adjusted his stance, feeling the weight of the M4 in his hands. It had been years since he'd fired one. Eyes on your sights, barked the range instructor, a wiry sergeant with a voice like gravel. Breathe out, squeeze. Don't yank. He exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked through the air, kicking against his shoulder. The target downrange showed a hole just left of center. Again, the sergeant said. He fired 3 more rounds. Each one landed closer to the bullseye. Muscle memory was coming back, but his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Behind him, someone snorted. Old man still got it, huh? He turned to see a kid, couldn't have been more than 25, grinning at him. The name tape on his fatigues read Vargas. Just rusty, he muttered. Vargas smirked. We'll see about that. He stepped up to the firing line, dropped into a perfect prone position, and emptied his magazine into the target. Every shot clustered tight in the center. The sergeant nodded approvingly. That's how it's done. Vargas stood, brushing dirt off his knees. No offense, Pops. Some things just take youthful reflexes. A few of the others chuckled. He clenched his jaw but said nothing. He'd met Vargas type before, cocky, fresh out of active duty, thinking they were invincible. The mess hall at lunch was loud with chatter. He sat alone, picking at his food, when Hayes slid into the seat across from him. "Vargas giving you trouble?" He shrugged. "Just noise." Hayes sipped his coffee. He was top of his class in Ranger School. Thinks that makes him God's gift to warfare. A pause. But he's never seen a convoy get hit by an IED. He looked up sharply. Hayes' expression was grim. "That's why you're here. Not for target practice, for the things they can't teach in schools." The afternoon brought medical training. A no-nonsense corpsman demonstrated how to apply a tourniquet one-handed. "Most convoy deaths are from bleeding out before help arrives," the corpsman said. "You stop the blood, you save the life." They paired up to practice. Vargas was assigned as his partner. "Lucky me," Vargas muttered, rolling up his sleeve. He wrapped the tourniquet around Vargas' arm, cinching it tight. "Ow. The hell, man?" "Pressure stops bleeding," he said calmly. "You want me to do it wrong?" Vargas glared but didn't complain again. That night in the barracks, he lay awake listening to the others snore. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows. A rustling came from the bunk below. Vargas' voice, uncharacteristically quiet, "You ever see anyone die?" The question hung in the dark. He didn't answer at first. Then, "Yeah." Vargas was silent for a long time. "Me too. But they don't know that." A pause. "I act like a jerk so they don't ask." He understood then. The bravado was armor. "Get some sleep, kid," he said finally. "Tomorrow's hell." Dawn brought the obstacle course, mud, barbed wire, and a 30-foot rope climb. His muscles burned, but he pushed through, hauling himself over walls, crawling under nets. Vargas matched him step for step, breathing hard. "Not bad, for a fossil." He grunted, vaulting over a log. "Keep talking. I'll bury you, in this mud." By the final stretch, they were neck and neck. The others had gathered to watch, shouting encouragement. He reached the finish line half a second before Vargas, collapsing onto his back, gasping. Vargas flopped down beside him. "Okay. Maybe you've got some juice left." He grinned despite himself. "Told you." Hayes found him cleaning his rifle that evening. "Heard about the race." He shrugged. "Kid's got stamina." "More than that." Hayes leaned against the wall. "They're watching you. The way you move, the way you don't panic. These kids know tactics, but you? You know war." He ran a cloth down the barrel. "Knowing war isn't something to be proud of." "No," Hayes agreed. "But keeping others alive is." The word settled over him. For the first time in years, he felt useful. The next morning, Vargas tossed him an apple at breakfast. "Don't want you passing out on me, old-timer." He caught it with a nod. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as out of place as he'd thought. The desert stretched endlessly under a white-hot sun. Inside the armored truck, the driver, now a contracted security operator, checked his rifle for the third time. Across from him, Vargas fidgeted with his helmet strap. "First real mission?" the driver asked. Vargas swallowed hard. "First time outside a training op." The convoy rolled forward, 3 supply trucks flanked by gun trucks like theirs. Dust swirled through the open windows, coating their gear in fine grit. Over the radio, Hayes' voice crackled, eyes sharp. "This stretch is ambush alley." An hour in, the lead truck hit the IED. The explosion sent a fireball boiling into the sky. The driver's truck swerved, brakes screaming. "Contact front," their gunner yelled. Gunfire erupted from the rocky hills. Bullets pinged off the armor plating. Vargas froze, eyes wide. The driver grabbed his vest and yanked him down. Stay low. Return fire only when you have a target. He peered through the gun port. Shadows moved between the rocks, muzzle flashes pinpointing their positions. His training kicked in. Breathe. Aim. Squeeze. One of the shadows dropped. Hayes' voice over the radio was calm: suppress and advance. Medic to the lead truck. The driver turned to Vargas. You good? Vargas' hands shook, but he nodded. Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. Then cover me. He shoved the door open. I'm getting to that lead truck. Vargas laid down covering fire as he sprinted through the kill zone. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels.